Hello my friends, and welcome back to another video. Today is going to be part 2 of the most disturbing books I've ever read. So I did do part 1 like last year, I think it was around July, and I have been getting comments about when I was going to film a part 2, but honestly, I was just waiting until I got enough books to put in this video. I guess I just don't read enough disturbing books all the time, so I had been waiting and putting this video off until I had enough to talk about. So before we get started, I have some disclaimers. Obviously this is part 2, so if you feel like some books are missing from this list, or you know what I read and you're like, why aren't you talking about this? You should probably check out part 1 because I have, I think, around 10 books in that video that I put in there, so go watch that one first if you want to see what I included in part 1. The second thing I want to talk about is all of these books are going to be varying degrees of disturbing. So they're not going to be on the same level as each other. Some books just have a little aspect of disturbing or some situations that I found disturbing, and then some of the books, like the whole entire book, is disturbing. So definitely be mindful of that. They're not gonna all be the same kind of disturbing as well. So, you know, check content warnings. I'm gonna try to give as much as I can in this video, but I don't want to spoil anything. So if you have any, you know, questions, you can reach out to me and I can definitely let you know in a more spoilery way. I just don't want to do it in this video in case someone doesn't want that spoiler. So just be mindful if you decide you want to pick any of these up. And lastly, these are disturbing to me. So some of you watching might not find these books disturbing. That's okay. We all find different things disturbing. So these books are just things that I think are disturbing, and that's why I'm including them in this video. Typically what I find disturbing is realistic horror or realistic events, human evil, anything with like an emotional aspect to it. That always gets me, and I find that more disturbing than a bunch of blood and gore. Sometimes violence is obviously included in books like these, but it's just gonna depend on what I find disturbing. So these might not be disturbing to you, but that's okay. This is just, you know, all my opinion, and what I find disturbing you might not, and vice versa. So just keep that in mind when you're watching it. You might have completely different opinions than me, and that is totally okay. So I have 9 books to talk about and 3 manga. So I'm gonna have the manga at the end of the video because I know not everyone cares about manga and not everyone reads it or wants to read manga. So I will have that at the end, but I do have 9 books here to talk about. So let's get into the most disturbing books I've read, part 2. So this first book is 3 Days in the Pink Tower by Evie Knight, and I will be honest, this is one of the more disturbing books on this list in my opinion, so yeah. So this book is about Josie, and the summer before her senior year, she goes to a carnival, and she has a very odd encounter with a fortune teller. And the next day, she gets a knock on her door, and these 2 men kidnap her at gunpoint and take her to this pink cabin in the woods. So basically Josie's on her own with some tarot cards and the fortune teller, and she has to survive. Now, what's really disturbing about this book is, one, it's very, very graphic. It was very hard to read. It's a very hard book to read. You are with Josie every step of the way, and you experience what she experiences. It's a very visceral experience, it's a very raw experience, and it was kind of traumatizing to read, I'm gonna be honest. It's very, very hard, and I think what makes it even harder is the author was writing about her own experience. And I think that's beautiful. I think the author obviously took a traumatic experience and she took control of it and made it her own, and I think that's beautiful, but this is a very, very, very tough read, and it's very short. It's extremely short, but it's very detailed, it's very graphic, and I think it could be very triggering for some people, and I think you should be very careful if you choose to read this one, but I did enjoy the book overall. I think the author did an amazing job. It also has some bits of magical realism in it and some like fantastical elements, which I do think help in a way, I guess, because the rest of the book is so real and it's so raw and it's so, you know, dark that I feel like those little bits of magical realism, they kind of ease the disturbing bit a little bit. Not by much, honestly, because the book is very hard to read, but I do think a lot of people will get something from this book, and I think the experience, even though it was hard, I wouldn't take it back. That's why I think this one deserves a place on this list. Next up, we have another short one, and this is The Necrophiliac by Gabrielle Whitcop. So this is a novella translated from French to English, and you follow the main character, Lucien, who is a necrophiliac. Obviously, I feel like the title is kind of self-explanatory. Now, again, very short, very quick. It's a very easy read in terms of the language and the pacing. I feel like you could definitely sit down and read it in just one day. It is very graphic. If you have problems with reading this kind of material, I think this one will bother you a bit. It's gross, I'm not gonna lie, it's a very gross book, but it's also very fascinating and, again, very easy. It's a very palatable experience. It's not too hard to comprehend, you know, the vocabulary isn't gonna go over your head or anything like that. I just feel like it's a very easy book to read, even if the material itself isn't quite as easy. But the style is very interesting. It's very like gothic, and I enjoyed my time with it, even though it is very messed up. But I did have fun with it, and I do think it's one of those books that it's an experience, you know, like it's an experience that you want to try at least once. I would say this one wasn't as disturbing as others on this list. It didn't bother me that much, but it is a gross book, and I do think it is disturbing in its own right. The next book is The Laws of the Skies. I do not know how to pronounce this author's name because it is French, so I'm not even going to try to butcher it because I know I would. So this is about a class of 6-year-olds that go on a camping trip, and things, you know, things just don't turn out as everyone expected. This book isn't too disturbing to me personally, but it is a very weird experience. I would not recommend this to people who don't want to read about a bunch of kids dying. I'm gonna be honest, that's what this book is. It's just a lot of death, and the main people that are dying are children. And I think that's pretty much why I find this book disturbing, is that you're just reading about kids dying. That's just the whole time. That's all it is. It is an enjoyable book in terms of how it's written. It's a very fast and quick. Again, not too long, so I feel like you could read it in a very short amount of time. So if you wanted something quick and disturbing, I feel like this one wouldn't be too bad to pick up. I feel like if you want something that's similar to Lord of the Flies, but I guess a little bit amplified in the disturbing nature, I would definitely recommend this. However, don't go into this book expecting that, you know, by some miracle the ending might redeem the entire book, because it's not going to happen. The very beginning to the very end, it's just death and sadness. Definitely keep that in mind, but I did enjoy this one, and honestly, I wanted The Troop by Nick Cutter to be like this book, because that's what I expected from The Troop, which I didn't like. I'm not a big fan of The Troop. I didn't really enjoy it. I thought it was kind of like boring. So when I read this, I was kind of like, oh, that's what I wanted that book to be like. So maybe if you felt similarly to me, you might want to check this one out. So next up is Goth by Otsuichi. This is a short story collection, but the stories are interconnected, and they focus on Marino and her classmate, who are both very interested and intrigued by brutal murders and serial killers. I think the reason I really enjoyed this one is because I am a big fan of short story collections, but more so short story collections that are interconnected. I like when there is something tying them all together. I just feel like it's more satisfying in the end, and it feels more like there was a purpose for each story, and that's why I like that. But two, this is very different than other Japanese horror that I've read. And I think it's just because a lot of Japanese horror that I've read is very outwardly supernatural based, and this one isn't very outwardly supernatural based. This one has a very heavy focus on serial killers, and that is something that I really like in fiction, so I think it just really worked for me. This is a very dark, a very gruesome short story collection. I was not prepared. I really didn't have expectations going into this one though, so I think I was just shocked because I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And the very first story is, it just sets everything off with a bang, and then the very last story is just like, oh, okay. And there is a lot of animal cruelty in this one, so be mindful of that. But I just thought each story was super well done, and they were all very different, which is very interesting because, like I said, they do connect. But I liked how different they all were, and I liked how, I don't know, there was just kind of a different focus for each story, and they were all just different in their own way. The twists were incredible. I just was sucked in from beginning to end, and I definitely was surprised by this one. And I think that if you love Japanese horror, if you love stories about serial killers, and you like dark and, you know, gruesome stories, I think you would really enjoy this one like I did. This next one, you know, this one's very interesting. And that is Tampa by Alyssa Nutting. I am going to try my best to talk about this one without making YouTube upset by using certain words. So hopefully you understand what I'm talking about. So in this book we are following our main character Celeste, who is 26 years old, and she is a middle school teacher. And the reason that she is a middle school teacher is for the sole reason of finding a 14-year-old boy to seduce and have a relationship with. I think you can understand why this is on my most disturbing books I've ever read. One, the subject matter is just very hard to read, but I think what makes this book very disturbing is the graphic and explicit scenes that you get. It's already pretty graphic because the main character is talking about her intentions and what she wants and what she wants out of this situation, right? Like, you're really inside her head and you're really following her and her ideas and her wants, and it's gross. It's very disgusting. But I think what sends this book over the top is those explicit scenes with the young boy. It's very graphic. I think a lot of people have a hard time with this one. I think a lot of people won't like it. And honestly, I don't even know if I really liked this one. I liked the idea of it, and I think that the messaging of this book is very important, that a predator can be anyone, even a 26-year-old, seemingly normal, pretty, attractive woman. So I do think the messaging is good. I just think that some of the scenes are a lot, and reading it was very hard, I'll be honest. It's very gross. It made me feel icky. It made me feel like I was gonna literally get in trouble for reading this because it is just so graphic. I do think some of that explicit and graphic nature takes away from the messaging just a little bit. I get the point, I do. So it was, you know, it was hard. There were times where I had to put the book down because it was just a lot. And I was telling my partner Justin that it's funny because, like, I'm laughing, but it's not funny. I'm just so uncomfortable that I just can't stop laughing, because if I don't laugh, I'm gonna not finish this book. So this one is definitely a lot. I can definitely understand why some people would not want to read this one. I'm not mad that I read it. I'm glad that I did experience it, but it is a lot, so keep that in mind if you do decide to pick it up. This next one is Penance by Kane Minato, and if you remember from part 1, or if you haven't seen part 1, I included Confessions by this author, and Confessions is one of my favorite books of all time. I absolutely loved it, and I really enjoyed Penance as well. I still prefer Confessions just because that ending is crazy, but I do really enjoy this one. The story is about 5 girls who encounter a stranger at the park when they're playing. 4 girls end up leaving their 5th friend alone with this stranger, and when they come back, she is dead. And the dead girl's mother is pretty much upset, and she blames the surviving friends for what happened to her daughter. Now, 15 years later, the case is still unsolved, and you kind of follow the 4 girls that have grown up into women and what their lives are like now. Now, my thing about this one is I don't think this whole book is disturbing. I don't think from beginning to end it's just one disturbing thing after another. However, what makes this book extremely disturbing to me is the build-up to the end. When everything comes together in the end and everything is revealed, I don't think it's what people expect from this book, and it does feel a lot like Confessions, because I would say that's kind of why I found Confessions disturbing. I mean, there are a few instances in like the beginning and the middle that I found to just be a lot, but the ending part of Confessions was really the disturbing part for me, and that's how I feel about Penance as well. I just think that the conclusion really takes the rest of the story over the edge, and for me, when I finished it, I was like, yep, okay, alright, that's it, okay, you got me. So that's why I am including this one. I just want to tell you all that in case you are listening to me and you're like, why is that one disturbing? I read it and didn't find it disturbing. Again, what's disturbing to me might not be disturbing to you, but that's really my reasoning for including this one. It is a very good book, and I think this author is incredibly talented and amazing at storytelling, and I want to read everything that this author writes just because I'm obsessed. I still do think Confessions is my favorite, but I do think this one is worth checking out if you loved Confessions and you want to read something similar, because this does follow a similar structure that Confessions does. This next book was actually recommended to me a lot because of my part 1 for this video, and I decided to read it, and everyone that recommended me this one is right, and that's why I am including it in my disturbing part 2, and that is Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. Now, this book, I'm going to give you a very, very brief synopsis because I can't even really go into the plot of this book. It's just wild. But in this book, you are following the main character, Natsuki, who is a child, and she has this stuffed hedgehog that talks to her, and he tells her that he is from another planet that has come to help her save Earth. Very, very brief synopsis. It doesn't even cover half of what this book is about, but this is a very dark book, and I wasn't sure that I was going to think it was disturbing based off the plot synopsis, but like I said, the plot synopsis really doesn't give you much about this story. What I find disturbing about this book is really the first half, and the first half is the build up to the second half, and everything that happens in the second half of this book is because of what happens in the first half. And the first half is very focused on real life horror and situations that are very possible, and I'm sure people have gone through very, very similar situations, and I think that's why this book is so disturbing to me, because this book goes off the walls. It's kind of bonkers, it's kind of just insane in certain ways, and I think if you don't really understand why it's that way, you don't really get it. Because, again, the first half of this book is laying down the groundwork for what happens in the second half and why the second half goes so off the rails and bonkers. And that's why it is so disturbing to me, is because that first half is so intense and so dark. Yes, the off-the-wall nature and the other stuff kind of gives a silly tone to the book. Not in the way that I think people might think it does. This book is crazy. It's wild. It's an experience. But that first half is just, it's a lot. And it's very sad. This is a very sad book. Very, very, very sad. And I think that all just makes it more and more disturbing. It's wild, but it just makes sense. Like, it just makes sense. Even if it is a little bit bonkers, it makes sense for what kind of story this is. And I'm definitely glad I read it. It was very interesting, and I really enjoyed this author's writing style, and I enjoyed the way this author expressed certain things and messages and ideas, because the author does it in such a clever way. The author kind of explains it in a way that makes it seem a little bit more crazy than it is, but when you really dig deep into the messaging that this author is, you know, exploring, and I agreed with a lot of what this author was saying, so it's a very weird book, but I think that a lot of people will get something out of this one. This next one is, I don't know if I would say that it is the most disturbing on this list, but I would say this one and Tampa are very closely tied. And this one is Saving Noah by Lucinda Berry. I feel like a lot of people know about this book. I feel like a lot of people have read this book. This is about the character Noah, and he is a straight A student. He's on honor roll, you know, he's a good kid. Then he admits to inappropriately touching the little girls that he teaches swim practice to. He's then sentenced to 18 months in a juvenile sexual rehabilitation center, and when he gets out, you are following his mother, and Noah's dad wants to cut him off because he just doesn't even want anything to do with him. But Noah's mother is his biggest supporter, and the whole book she is really just trying to revert back to normal life. She's trying to take care of him, she's trying to help him, she's trying to love him, and she's trying to kind of just push past what he did. And it's a very, very, very hard read. And a lot of the topic around this book is, you know, what you should do as a parent, like how you should handle this. And I think a lot of people that would read this book will probably hate Noah's mom, because I know I did, because that's how I felt the entire time. Noah's mom really frustrated me while I read this. I thought she was very ignorant. I thought she was very self-centered, and I thought that she was going about things extremely, extremely wrong. And so this is a very hard book to read. It's a lot. It's very emotional. It's, you know, it's a complex subject. It's just a very tough subject to tackle, and I do think Lucinda Berry does a good job at tackling the subject. I personally really liked the way this story was written, and I think that it was done in a good way. But again, a very hard book to read. It's a lot. It's very gross. It's gonna make you feel icky. It's gonna make you feel disgusted and like you need to go take a shower, because that's how I felt. But the ending of this book is kind of wild, and it makes you think a lot about some things that happened in this story and look at things a little bit differently, which I did like, and I think that the twist ending was very interesting. So I don't know if I can recommend this book, because it's a book that talks about things that are very hard, and you know, it definitely deserves a place on this list because it was an experience. The last book that I have to talk about before I go into manga is Creatures of Passage by Maroa Yajide. So this book has a lot going on in it. It's about the main character who is a taxi driver in Washington, D.C., and she is grieving over the death of her twin brother who was murdered and tossed into this river. So this book is very interesting because it again has some aspects of magical realism involved in it, which isn't always my favorite, but I do think this was a very interesting addition to this type of story. However, the reason that I find this book disturbing is because that it is about a child being touched inappropriately at school. The main character's great nephew is a witness to what happened to this classmate, and it does give you the POV of the person doing these acts on the children, which was really the reason that I am including this, because getting that POV, it really adds to the story for that part of the plot, and I do think it was very important, but it was very, very gross. And you know, the POV does go into descriptions and graphic, you know, thoughts, and you really get into the head of the person doing these acts, and I didn't like it. It wasn't fun for me, but I do think that it added a lot to the story, and I think had it not been in there, the story wouldn't have been as impactful with that storyline as it had been. The rest of the story, again, like I said, deals with magical realism, and there are like kind of two separate storylines with the main character and the death of the twin brother, and then the great nephew and what he witnessed. So there are kind of two storylines going on, and I do think that the storyline with the great nephew was definitely more disturbing, but I do think that the storyline with the main character and the twin brother did have a lot of things going on that people will definitely find disturbing as well. I can't go into it because it is spoilery, of course, but I do think both storylines have their purpose for the overarching story, and there is a reason for both of them being what they are. So I definitely think this is a very interesting story, and I don't think everyone will love it. I think the magical realism might not work for everyone. It wasn't my favorite part of the story, but I do think overall the story was very, very well done, and I think the author handled both storylines extremely well. So next up are the manga that I'm going to talk about. I again did this at the end in case no one wants to listen to this portion. I know manga is not for everyone, so that's why I'm including it last, but there are three that I want to talk about that I think are really disturbing, and if you are in the market for a disturbing horror manga, I think these might be up your alley. First up, we have Happy Sugar Life. This is a 10-volume series. I have read all of them, and this deals with two girls. One of them is older and one of them is younger, and the older one is essentially grooming the younger one. This is a very interesting story because you almost kind of forget what you're reading. If you're not really looking at it very hard and you're not really reading, I think, between the lines, you could almost not really get what this story is, and you're not really seeing like how disturbing this story is. But I think when you really, really look at what's going on and you really think about it, and as the story continues in each volume, I think it just gets progressively worse. And this series does end on a very, I want to say, bittersweet note. Again, I don't know if that's the right word because it's just a very complicated story in terms of what's going on, and it was very confusing to read sometimes because it's very conflicting. There's a lot to it, and as you continue on the series, I think more and more layers get revealed, but you still have to remember what you're reading. And it's a very odd story. Very weird, I don't know, it was just a weird series. There obviously is like murder involved and like, you know, other things going on, but the grooming aspect is really what makes this story disturbing to me and kind of pushes it over the top into disturbing territory. And I think the more you learn about the story, there's so many like layers to it. There's just so much going on, and it becomes a lot. So I don't know if I would technically recommend this one, but I do think it was an interesting series, and I am glad that I read it. This next series is one of my absolute favorites. I talk about it all the time, so I feel like most people aren't going to be surprised that this is in here, and that is Blood on the Tracks by Shuzo Oshimi. I absolutely love this series. It is very emotional, it is very dark, but basically this is the story about a mother and son who have a very odd relationship, and that's all I can really tell you without giving too much away. The series is ongoing, so it's not completed yet, but I believe volume 14 is about to come out, and we've had a time jump in the series. I think the biggest thing for me is the emotional aspect of this story. It's just so sad. It's so depressing. I'm always depressed when I read this series, and I love it. I do. I love this series. I think it's extremely well done. I think it's amazing, and I look forward to every volume that comes out, but I have to mentally prepare myself to read this series because it's just so draining. It breaks my heart over and over again every time I read a new volume. I have so much heartache when I read it. It's just so sad. I think the topics involved make it more sad. It has amazing art and it's a great story, but definitely prepare yourself emotionally if you decide to go into it. I mean, not everyone will probably have the same emotional reaction that I had to it, but I just have an emotional reaction every time I read one of these volumes, and I love it, but I have to prepare myself for it every time. This last one is a manhwa, and that is the Korean version of a manga, and it is Killing Stalking by Kugi. This is the story of two characters, Yoonbum and Sang-woo, and Yoonbum is obsessed with Sang-woo. He has a crush on him. He's just utterly obsessed with Sang-woo. And one day Yoonbum breaks into Sang-woo's apartment, and what he finds, you know, is very interesting. I know the reason that this is super disturbing to me is because I have visuals. I have to see it as well as read the story, and I think that adds a lot, and it adds a layer of, you know, darkness. I don't know, it almost takes it to an extreme level, I guess, because I have to visually see it. I have to experience what's going on with my eyes, not just in the form of words, and I think that that definitely is one of the reasons that I am adding this to the list. The material itself is obviously very messed up, it's very, very dark. And I think that a lot of people might go into this thinking that it's a love story, and it is 100% not a love story. This is not a romance. There is no fluff to it. This is a story of obsession and just evil. I mean, I know that sounds weird, but there's a lot of evil in this story. I don't think everyone will love this story. This is also ongoing. I believe volume 3 just came out. As much as the material bothers me to some extent, and it does irritate me because I get frustrated while reading it, I'm still invested enough to see how this is going to play out, because there are definitely several ways this story could go, and I don't know which one it's gonna be, and I don't think it's gonna be a good one. I don't think this story is gonna end in a good way. I can't see it going down that route just based off of how the first couple volumes have been. But there's something about it that is a little bit addicting, and I think it is because it explores very messed up, dark things, which, you know, probably says a lot about me, but I like dark and I like messed up and I like disturbing, so that's probably why I'm drawn to something like this. But it's very interesting, and I think a lot of people will enjoy this story as it, you know, explores and discusses certain things and messages. So I would recommend this one because I think it is well done, but just be mindful when you go to pick it up. It's not an easy story to read. And there you have it, my friends. That is it for part 2 on the most disturbing books that I've read. I'm sure I could probably make a part 3 to this. I don't have any on my radar as of right now because I have basically just talked about all the disturbing books I've read in the last year. So it might take me a while to do part 3, but if you are interested in a part 3, I can definitely keep this going and keep talking about disturbing books that I've read. So please let me know in the comments down below. If you have any recommendations for disturbing books that you would like me to check out, please also leave them down below so I can add them to my TBR and eventually check them out. If you agree with any of the books that I included, please let me know. If you want to read any of these, I would love to hear that also in the comments. You're free to disagree with me in the comments down below. Please do it in a respectful manner because these are my opinions and I'm not saying that this is the end-all be-all list for disturbing books. So I would just appreciate it if you took the time to be respectful in the comments and respect other people in the comments, because that is what I would like on my channel, and I do not tolerate people being disrespectful. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to see more disturbing book videos in the future, please give me a thumbs up. That way I know you enjoyed it and I can continue to make these for you all. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I also have a Patreon linked down in the description box in case you want to join. We can become friends, talk about books, horrifying books, thrilling books, romance books, manga, all that good fun stuff. And with that being said, I hope you are having a great day, night, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!